Welcome. It is no accident that you have found your way to the Release the Genie podcast. What would you do with 3 wishes? And what if you discovered that you are in fact that very genie that could grant them? Well, join us now as we discover who our next genie is as we listen in and learn the stories of triumph, inspiration, and passion with some very special guests. And now, without further delay, your host of the Release the Genie podcast, Mr. Paul Rogers.
That's so much better. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're tuning in from. I am your host, Paul Rogers, and welcome to another episode of Release the Genie. We have got a very, very special guest with us today. For me, this has been one of my year goals, is to meet this wonderful gentleman. I'll tell you a little bit about him. John David Mann. Now, he is an award-winning author whose books have sold more than 3 million copies and are in 36 languages, including the best-selling classic, The Go-Giver with Bob Burg. Your avid watchers will know we had Bob on a little while ago. So this is the other half of the dynamic duo. Not only is he doing The Go-Giver, but he's an author in his own right with New York Times best-selling memoir, The Red Circle, with former Navy SEAL Brandon Webb, and New York Times bestseller parable, The Latte Factor, with personal finance legend David Bach. As a teenager, John started his own high school with an award-winning composer and cellist. Oh, look, we did new stuff here. Before turning to careers of an entrepreneur and author, his Take the Lead with former Washington staffer Betsy Myers was named by Tom Peters and the Washington Post Best Leadership of 2001. And a little scoop for you as well. His first novel, Steel Fear, is coming out 13th of July, 2021. So welcome, John. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
It's excellent to be here. Thank you for that preamble.
Well, you know, you've got so many achievements. It was kind of hard to pick the right one. So I'm going to let you set the scene now. I'm going to let you have a little wander around and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Okay, well, I'll wander around, but I'll try not to go too far. So, you know, you mentioned some highlights of things that I've done, and the behind the scenes of that is that I never really had a plan per se, or I should say, the plan kept changing. For example, I never actually set out to be a writer. I never set out to be an author. I did set out to be a cellist. I set out to be a composer. I set out to be in business, an entrepreneur. I set out to be in education and started school. That kind of was a surprise, but once it was there, we did it. But with everything that I did, I always seemed to be the one who ended up editing other people's stuff. If there was a newsletter to get out, a bulletin, you know, whatever, a poster even, I just had an affinity for editing. So I spent a couple of decades actually, you know, people have often asked, how do you get started as a writer? I'll tell you how I got started as a writer: editing, making other people's stuff better. Making other people's stuff better prepared me really well for making my own stuff better. And the adage, the good writing is rewriting, is really true. I mean, the better part of successful writing is rewriting, revising, editing, trimming, chopping, you know, turning inside out, turning upside down, throwing stuff out that you thought was fantastic, starting over. That's a big part of writing. So I edited for 2 decades. And then I kind of backed into books when Bob Burg approached me. In fact, I was planning, here was a plan, the thing that when you make, God laughs. I was planning to be a screenwriter. That was the career path that I was working on. And Bob came along and said, I need you to write this book with me. And it's like, I don't have time for that. So I like to say Bob Burg ruined my career because screenwriting.
Bob Burg hijacked what was otherwise.
Right. He hijacked me. He hijacked a plane that was about to go nowhere in Hollywood, I suppose. So yeah, and so that's where The Go-Giver was really the start of books, and I've published about 30 books since then. So here I am. It's what I do.
Awesome, and I really like the. What I had in my mind was, the cutting room floor, where, we know that movies are shot and then they have to actually still piece a very entertaining story together, but it can't be 7 hours long. So,
right.
Yeah. And a wordsmith. I always like that word. So you are a wordsmith. How does that sound?
You put the words on the anvil and you go wham, wham, wham with the iron hammer. And yeah, it's pretty vigorous work. Get all sunburned.
Yeah. No eyebrows and things like that.
Singed, ashy.
Yeah, smell of burning in the morning. I wonder if you could tell us, what was one of your aha release the genie moments?
I'll tell you what came before Bob Berg. I mean, the Bob Berg moment was critical, but what came before that was for quite a while, for many years, I was editing, and that was good training, but I also wasn't really earning any money. It was my avocation, but it wouldn't support the family, it wouldn't support me. So I had a business. I was in network marketing. I was in distribution. I was a sales trainer. I had worked with a nutritional company, and we had this massive nutritional line. I had a huge organization, and so for years, for decades, really, I was in the sales, distribution, and network training business, and which I don't think is really my facility. I don't think it's where I was meant to be. I don't think it's where I do my best, but that's where I was.
Yeah. And
the business that I was in had been going up and up and up and up and up for years. And one year it started to go down, 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 down. And it had been through ups and downs. And I always kind of knew what to do to make it go up again. And everything I tried didn't work. It was going down. And I realized at one point, this is like 96, 97, that it was in an irreversible decline. And all of a sudden, this business, which had supported me without question, without concern, without worry, without a backup plan, that had supported me very well for many, many years, was going away. And all of a sudden, I was jumped out of an airplane without a parachute. And I thought, well, okay, what do I fall back on? And I thought, well, what I would fall back on was writing.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to become a screenwriter. I don't see how to make money at that. I don't see, unless you're incredibly lucky, but I'm going to just count on being incredibly lucky, and I'm going to do it. And I'll tell you, I jumped in, Paul. I just read every screenplay I could get my hands on. I watched every movie I could watch. I went out to Hollywood and went to conferences. I studied the craft like crazy for about 2 years. And I'm sure I was on the verge of my big breakthrough. Actually, I'm really sure that I wasn't. But Bob Berg came along one fall and said, I'd like you to work on this book with me. And I said, I really don't have time. I'm working on all these side projects that just make barely enough money to live on. And but it was Bob. And I knew him. We were friends. And I thought, because I told my wife, I said, because it's Bob, I gotta at least look at it. So we flew down to Florida and we spent a day with him. We visited and we talked about his idea for a book and played around with it. I went home and a few weeks later, I had some spare time and I wrote a chapter. It's actually the heart of the chapter on authenticity with Deborah Davenport. That's in that first book. I wrote that chapter and thought, this feels really good. And I emailed it to Bob and said, what do you think? And he's like, what do I think? It's fantastic. We went back and forth and I kept writing chapters and shooting them to him and he'd shoot back thoughts and ideas and critique. And we went back and forth for, 4, 5, 6 weeks and we had a book.
You know, that collaboration and I can see your whole, when you start talking about the collaboration side, your energy just kind of spikes. So, I can see where your creativity really needed to sort of come out with the screenwriting and I'm really pleased you found your true calling because I know you've actually helped millions of people. So, that's quite an accolade to be laid at your feet, kind sir.
It's what I wanted more than anything in the world, was to have a
Awesome.
positive impact on millions of people's lives. I just didn't know how to do it, didn't know how to find a path for it. So it found me, as you say.
Well, the universe has a funny way of bringing things to you.
If you'll just cooperate a little bit, it
Yeah,
will bring the thing to your doorstep. It really
yeah,
will. That's how it works.
and being able to see opportunities, because you know
Yeah.
opportunities don't usually come along saying, "I am an opportunity." You actually have to go on faith, go on your gut
Yes.
instinct, and
Yes.
and being a friend as well.
Yes.
And that just helped with the bridge. So I love that. I really do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, look, I think you've knocked that one out of the park, my friend. So and this is going to be interesting, what would you say is one of your favorite quotes or mantras?
uh, so let's see. Well, here's one that comes to mind. I'll give you two.
Okay, good.
So the first I got from Jed Bartlett, the fictional president in the TV show West Wing, and it is his mantra, and it's simply, "What's next?"
Mm,
I believe it's the very last thing he said in the series. It was the very last line of the TV series, and it's what he always said. He frequently said it at the end of an episode, and for me, it is really like a life motto in a way. What that tells me, what that says for me when I say it, "What's next?" It's first of all, it's an invitation forward.
mm,
It's an invitation to move forward. It is a pulling away from the temptation to rest on my laurels if I've had something good happen,
mm,
and equally pull away from dwelling on the past, chewing over resentments, fussing over things that went badly, uh, uh, harboring old grudges. It's like, yeah, okay, but what's next? Where do
mm,
we go next? And it's that's particularly important for me. I've discovered, well, in so many ways, but there have been awful things that have happened in my life that I've had to find a way to pull myself forward, that wasn't artificial, like
mm.
some empty bromide, like, well, it's all for the best. Yeah, no, it's not. It was horrible. These days, I find it sometimes a book that I've already written that has done really, really well, like The Go-Giver is a great example. It becomes like this thing that exerts a gravitational pull on me. I love the book,
Mm.
but also when I try to write a sequel or I try to write another parable, sometimes it feels like, oh my God, I could never do it. I could never match that. I could never equal that.
Mm.
And I think that, I have to say, well, what's next? It's not going to be the same. It's going to be different. It's going to be different. It's going to be different. Everything is unique. So that's one of my mantras. I think the other mantra I would share is one that I actually put in the mouth of Aunt Elle in The Go-Giver Leader. And she said, a writer that I very much admire once said, "I write to find out what I think." And that author, by the way, was... and now I'm spacing on her name, so it'll come back to me. But yeah. Play It As She Lays, she wrote, Year of Magical Thinking. Joan Didion. It was Joan Didion who wrote that. Anyway, Andel said, "I write to find out what I think." And here's what I think. I think we live to find out who we are.
Mm.
I have found that really to be true, that often when I'm writing, I find things that I've put on the page that I didn't realize I knew or thought, or there was an insight I didn't really know I had. This also happens in speaking. Sometimes I've been doing a conference call or even a podcast like we're doing right now. And I say something and go, I didn't know that, or I had never thought that before. So I think that that expression, teaching, communicating is more than anything, selfishly speaking, a golden opportunity to discover what insights I have that I didn't know I had. I think that all of us are just brimming with wisdom and insight that we don't know that we have. And that's one of the great reasons for writing. I think, and that's
Sorry.
also the great reason for living. It's because we are this remarkable person that we don't know we are. that's why it's worth taking risks and living full out, because we get to turn pages and discover surprises in ourselves that we didn't know we had.
I love that. And just going back to your what's next.
Yeah.
That's like saying, I've got a clean slate. I've done what I'm doing, but
Yes.
it's like a team who go out to defend a lead. So they play differently because they're defending something rather than attacking, which is the what's next. So same game, different type of mindset. So I love what you said there. And and Antel, obviously the wise oracle, and I think you're right. I think that's especially now when we're into sort of very difficult times when we have to look inside. And I do believe, actually, as you said, we are infinite potential.
Yeah.
And it only takes one line or one thing, which you don't plan it, it just happens. And I think that's why I think that's where the magic is. It's not in the script. I think it's just the spontaneity and the authenticity.
And may I give you one more brief example?
Oh, please do.
That is just like the Bob Berg story with me, and it happened just a few years later, which was in 2009. I was working on this book you just mentioned with Betsy Myers. It was a book on leadership. And I had done The Go-Giver, and we were working on the next Go-Giver book. And I had, but all the writing I'd done for years before publishing books, it was all about leadership. It was about personal development. It was about, sales to some extent, but mainly leadership and personal development and that kind of thing in business. And my agent called me up and said, I've got this guy sitting in my office who's a former Navy SEAL who needs to write a memoir and needs a collaborator. And now I know that's not what you do. You interested? And I was like, yes, because I have learned when the door knocks, listen. And I said, yeah, I totally. In fact, not only am I interested, I have to do that. So that was 11 years ago. That guy and I have since written 6 books together. And the one you mentioned, the New York Times, the Red Circle, the memoir was the first. That cemented our writing partnership, but we've done a slew more, all nonfiction. And now the novel that you mentioned, Steel Fear, it's coming out this summer. We wrote together. It's a partnership with him. So none of that would have happened if I had said I can't really do. I mean, I'm writing this kind of book. I really can't write that kind of book.
But that's a theme. You can see that actually. Have I got time to do this? And then the next one came around, and I think that life gives us lessons, and if you learn the lesson, you can move on in the what's next. So I think that really will resonate with people being open to stuff.
Yeah. So many people say, I hate parables because they're just not realistic. Yes, they are, because our lives are actually living parables. We just don't notice it sometimes.
and I talk to people saying, you are not your story. You are the lessons you learn from the story.
Oh, I like that.
And everyone's got a lesson they can teach somebody else. And I think that is the power of creativity, of writing. I'm a big books person, so
yes,
wonderful. I love it. We could talk for a long while. This is great. So
absolutely.
So look, has there been any sort of setback which you've had to overcome? You said about your business sort of going down. Is that one, or is there another?
That is one. That was a big one. I've had enormous setbacks in my personal life. I mean, I had a bankruptcy. I lost a child. I've been through 2 divorces, and I'm just giving you the good parts. So I'm very familiar with setback. I'll just mention here because it already came up in our conversation. I'll just point to this one. It's odd, and that is when we sold the Go-Giver to a publisher who bought the Go-Giver, and you may know the story. It was rejected 22 times before it was finally bought by another publisher and published the Go-Giver. It did pretty well right out of the gate, and then it did better and better and better as the years went by. Within the first 6 months of the book's publication, the publisher came back and said, "Okay, we'd like 2 more books from you guys." So they signed us onto a 2-book deal. Boom, and they said one of them is going to be Go-Giver Sell More. And the other one's going to be a parable. We don't know. We don't care what it's called. We don't care what it's about. It's just you guys just write us another parable because this is great. So we did. Wrote another parable. Parable came out, and it sank like a stone. It did not do well. Everybody who read it loved it, but not very many people read it.
Oh.
Not very many people knew about it. It just went nowhere. It was like whistling in a hurricane.
Oh.
And I will tell you, Paul, that really shook me. It shook me far more than I thought it would. In fact, I didn't realize for the first couple of years just how badly my confidence was rattled. What eventually happened with that book was Bob and I were both heartbroken because we loved that book. And I happen to know that you love that book. We took it back and said, this book had the wrong title, had the wrong cover, it had the wrong clothes on. It's the right book. So we went back to our publisher and said, we know that you never do this. We know this isn't done, but we'd like to republish the book under a different title with a different cover and do a very, very minimal rewrite, just changing a few things to fit the new title better. And our publisher said, yeah, we're good with that, which made my jaw drop to the floor. So we did. We republished it, and that's the Go-Giver Leader. Once that book came out, with that cover, with that title, with that frame, that positioning, it's done very, very well. Lots and lots of people have read it. It's part of the series. But I didn't realize, again, for years that it really rattled me. Even though I had that early success of the Go-Giver, this apparent failure shook my confidence. It took me years to get that confidence back. So, but happily I did. Eventually it worked out. But yeah, that was a sobering experience. Talk about not resting on your laurels. That's kind of, I think, where What's Next came from.
Yeah, no, and I can see there's a very common thread running through. And what I really liked about what you said there, it kind of made me think of, don't change the goal, change the plan, and still keep the goal. And as you said, with a sort of repositioning.
Yes.
The goal was still met, which was, you loved the story, you loved the message, but it was actually just a very subtle, and that's kind of like
a tweak.
Yeah, revising the plan, but not actually saying, okay, we'll throw that out. That's no good. I think that's, again, very, very powerful. Good for you. I love it. And it's, as you said beforehand, one of my favorite books out of the series.
I'm so glad. And if we hadn't done that, would you know the book? I don't know.
Well, to be honest, that's the thing. I see it as a journey. And I think that's where you guys were sort of created. And the first one was really powerful. But then there's subtle interplays where the characters will come in. And I like the fact that you can actually pick up a story arc and that's where that's coming from. So for me personally, and I know a lot of my viewers,
those arcs continue in the not yet published fourth parable. Yes.
Look at that. I know I've got a lot of Go-Giver fans, so that's very exciting. So tell us, what are you working on at the moment?
Okay. Well, I just let that cat out of the bag. There is a fourth parable, and it's called The Go-Giver Marriage. And this one I wrote with my wife. Bob is, on the team as usual, but he said from the beginning, he says, I've never been married, so I don't feel quite right being on the cover as the co-author. So he's penning a foreword, and he's, part of the whole process as usual. It's the whole Go-Giver team, but the co-authors of that are going to be me and my wife. And very excited about that. It's all written, no publication date yet. So that's in the pipeline. I'm going to guess that's in 2022, but we'll see. I'm working on a book about writing, which will be ready in a couple of months, actually, through my website. And that book is called How to Write Good, or at least Gooder. And that's that. There you go. That's just my own approach to writing. And then, of course, the novel's coming. It's called Steal Fear. It's already out on Amazon. I mean, you can see it, Barnes and Noble, everywhere. I think it's going to be in Walmart and Target and just you name it. But it's, it's out there for pre-order now on Amazon. It's coming in July. It's a thriller. And I'll give you the log line, the pitch, which is a disgraced Navy SEAL stalks a serial killer on an aircraft carrier in the midst of the Pacific Ocean. That's the setup. And that comes out July, and then the sequel to that comes out a year later, which I'm writing right now.
Wow, I can I can see movies in the pipeline, and hey, as a screenwriter, that's going
actually
to be your...
I have a confession to make, which is the book Steel Fear. We've already signed a deal for a streaming TV series based on the book. So it looks like I finally found my way by hook or by crook to Hollywood, one way or the other.
You've gone the circle and you've come back. To be honest, that's a wonderful, wonderful journey, and testament to you going forward, as we said, but not giving up, playing to what you actually wanted to do.
Yeah.
Because, and universe is a funny way of dumping you on the right path.
Very much so. I have found that to be the case.
Well, that's amazing, and great scoops as well. So now we move to the second part of the show, where I get to ask you for 3 wishes. Oh. So, my good genie, are you ready?
Sure.
I was born ready. So, number 1, what was the best advice you have ever received?
I think that it was this. So many possible answers, of course, but I think I'm going to say that I have a screenwriting teacher that I was studying with when Bob and I began The Go-Giver. His name is Hal Krosman. He's just out of Hollywood. He's a magnificent teacher, a wonderful man, and he taught us all kinds of techniques and tips and tools and tactics and practices. But he said in his advanced course, he said, all that is good, but there are 2 things you need to do if you want to be an A-list screenwriter, if you want to make it to the top of this field. Number 1, you've got to be better than good. You've got to be better than excellent. You've got to be the best possible writer you can possibly be. You have to take your very, very best writing and then improve it. Do better, do better, do better. Work on it every day. He said, you just have to be excellent. You have to do the work. Familiar phrase to you. Number 2 is you have to be easy to work with.
Yeah.
There's this mythology that Hollywood loves working with prima donnas. No way. They spit out prima donnas. Nobody wants to work with a pain in the neck. You have to be easy to work with, which means you have to accept good critique. And I think that I'm going to boil this paragraph down to a sentence, which is you have to have the capacity to listen to, absorb, and use good critique, because nobody knows you the way you know yourself, except for the rest of the universe. There are people out there who know things you don't know.
Yeah,
and you have to be prepared to listen.
I think that's very important. And for me, having reading going through all the texts, I think when you stop learning, I think that's when you actually know you've reached a very exact. You started to go over the top, and so I love it. I think that's a really good advice. So awesome! Wow, I can see how that shaped you. So and your book too. How to write gooder. I love it.
Yes, that's the plan. That is the plan, at least.
So, good value already. So I'm going to move to my second wish, having already bagged my feed on the first. So what advice would you give your younger self?
That's great. Actually, I'm working on another book I didn't mention. It's another parable with not with Bob, with a friend, Dan Rockwell. And there's a line in there. Because there's a character in that book is actually asked that question, basically. And there's this wonderful scene in the movie Shawshank Redemption, which everybody knows and loves, where where the Morgan Freeman character is talking to the parole board officer, and he says he talks about how he wishes he could talk to that stupid kid who committed that terrible crime. I'd like to talk to him, tell him how things are, but I can't. That kid's long gone, and this old man is all that's left. And it's just such a moving scene. And I think everybody who's watched it has asked themselves, what if I were talking to that stupid 19-year-old kid who committed these terrible crimes, whether they were terrible crimes or not, but at least we've all committed awful mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So the answer that my character gives in the old man in my chapter says is have more faith and less certainty.
Mm.
And that's what I would love to tell. The reason it's in the book is that's what I would tell myself.
Yeah.
When I was a young man in my 20s, I was just so sure I knew what I was doing. I was so sure I knew the answers. And I didn't have anywhere near the faith in myself or faith in other people that I would come to have in later years, which I gained only through, inordinate suffering. So more faith, less certainty.
So this is always a question. And do you think you would have listened to yourself if you would have turned up and said that to yourself?
No.
I haven't met a single person yet who said, no, actually, I would have stopped. And
yeah, totally. I would have. No.
Oh, yeah. But to be honest, you alluded to some personal and also business setbacks. They have made you who you are now and set you on the path you are on now. So
and they have said that, not in so many words. They have forced it. They have said to me, yeah, less certainty. Yeah. Don't think you're so right. Yeah. And have more faith. Have more faith. Trust.
I love it. I love it. Even if it was advice we wouldn't have listened to in our 20s, now
it might have sunk in. You know what? Exactly. It might have sunk in. It might have sunk in on some level. Yeah. And it might have been that, well, who knows? But anyway, I'm saying it to myself now. Does that count?
No, that's great. Well, if Morgan Freeman can tell it to himself, you're certainly allowed. So,
okay, cool.
So my final wish is, have you got a personal habit that attributes to your success?
Yes. Yes, I floss. No, I'm not going to give that. There can be, it's a good habit to have, but it's not probably the life-changing habit I should mention here.
Well, you've just made all the dentists across the land very happy. So they're like, happy. Oh, somebody listened.
So happy. Especially this day of Zoom, we're all seeing each other's faces. There was a time, it was in my I guess I'm going to say in my late 20s and into my 30s, where I learned this idea about self-talk that people teach, and how much influence our self-talk has on our thinking and therefore our activity, our action. And I really took that to heart. It's something that my friend Brandon Webb said that when he redid the SEAL sniper course, this most significant change he made was to introduce a course of what he calls mental management, mental self-management. And it was basically about self-talk. And it radically changed the capacity of that whole generation of snipers. Whatever you think about that. So I learned a habit of self-talk, which was to actually say what I was thinking out loud, to verbalize some of the nonsense going on in my brain. And I would be shocked to hear what I was thinking. I would say stuff out loud. Now I'd say, John, you're an idiot. Oh, I think, John, this is awful. You don't have a clue what you're doing. I have no idea what I'm going to do here. I would say these things and I would go, wow, I'm really thinking that. Yeah, you're really thinking that. The habit I think that I've developed out of paying close attention to my self-talk is I really learned how to ask myself good questions, better questions, gooder questions. I think that people sometimes say, what do you do? Do you ever have a writer's block? Oh yeah, plenty. And my number one stratagem for passing through writer's block is to step back and ask myself a better question. I think that asking yourself great questions is one of the quickest and most solid ways through impasses, difficulties, and blockades, and finding yourself in a greener pasture. So that's my habit. Learn to ask yourself better questions.
And I think what you do is you drill through all the noise and you get down to actually what your truth is. What
is happening here? What am I asking? What is the issue? What do I want? Where am I going? How can I do this? What is it I really want to see happen here? Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
What's important to me
Well,
in this.
exactly. I mean, we kind of tell ourselves all sorts of nonsense, but actually, if you're able to call it out and
Yeah.
say, okay, then it's sort of like most people who say silly things. It's like,
And by the way, there's this whole teaching around self-talk, which is affirmations, which is when you tell yourself something negative, switch it to say something positive. So you say, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. And say, John, you are brilliant. You know exactly what you're doing. Yeah, but I don't believe that that's true. So I never found that affirmations work for me because they always seem like just silly flip-flops of the negative self-talk I was already doing. What I found was asking good questions is much more powerful than lambasting myself with some affirmation that I may or may not believe right now.
that's amazing and so true. I mean, and we're living in a world of noise at the moment. That I think if people can just hone in on that, then they're going to find their path through an ever increasing hard minefield.
Yeah.
So lovely. I love it. Well, my goodness me, I really cashed in on those wishes. So I'm very happy. Finally, before we sum up, because I know obviously you're a keen book man yourself. So is there a favorite book a go-to book which you have?
But I knew you were going to ask this question, and I really have had a tough time answering it. I can tell you the books that had the most impact on me, and I'll do that very quickly, and then maybe I'll come up with one. The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis is the last of the Narnia books. Had an enormous. I mark my life as my life before I read that book and my life after I read that book. I sat in my home and cried for 2 days. I couldn't go to school after I read that book. It just moved me enormously. Looking back, I think what it did for me was it opened just my eyes to the idea that there's depth to the world, that there's more going on sort of in the invisible. Huge, huge impact on me, The Last Battle. Number two is I read a book by Buckminster Fuller, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And I had a chance to hear him speak live. And what Fuller did for me was what impressed me most with him was this unshakable, bone deep, profound optimism that he had, that the universe is a benign place, that humanity is ultimately a benign influence for all of its folly, for all of its awfulness, for all of its destruction. That incredibly bright view, that unshakable optimism, has flavored my life ever since. I think it did before. It just kind of resonated for me. I was never a huge novel reader until my wife influenced me to do so. She said one day, she said, you should really read East of Eden. And all I read was nonfiction, was business books. But I picked up East of Eden, and that opened my eyes to what an epic could be. And then I read a novel called A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. And that's one of my favorite novels, because what that novel showed me in this most poetic, profound, hilarious, profane, bizarre, incredible way was that the universe is not an accidental place, that things have meaning on many levels that is often not revealed until unsuspecting moments. And that's what happens in this book. It's worth reading just for that. And then finally, I will mention the very first book I ever read, which is still one of my favorites, and that is Little Bear by Elsa Homeland Minarek, I think her name is. Anyway, I love that book because it's I wrote a blog post about why I love that book, but it's still my favorite book. So what book would I recommend? All I can recommend is the book I'm working on, because I'm trying to bring the world the best book I can think of. So it's a book I recommend. I guess I'd recommend The Go-Giver if you haven't read it.
No, to be honest, hey, if you haven't read it, where have you been? And secondly, there's a lot of exciting stuff you're working on, and I'm gonna grab into those books, because I kind of know some of your parables, and they have captured my imagination.
You know them. And I would say, for anybody who's listening, those watching who have read The Go-Giver, but aren't familiar with the other books in the series, I actually would. It's like everyone's read A Wrinkle in Time, but who's read the other books in the series, right? So I would actually recommend the other two parables that are out now, which is The Go-Giver Leader and The Go-Giver Influencer, because they're each stories in their own right that have their own cast of characters, their own twists and turns and surprises, their own lessons, and they all build on the ongoing saga.
To be honest, having having read a lot of them regularly, I can very much vouch and yeah, I'm not going to spoil it. You just need to go and read them. That's as simple as that. So, well, look, John, I'd like to say a big thank you. Fantastic sort of Genie moments and lots of value. So, and very exciting things you're working on at the moment. So, watch this space. And what's next? What do you think of that?
There you are. Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. As I said, it was something I've been very excited about, getting to meet you. Now everyone else can get to meet you and be similarly excited. So thank you very much, viewers. Wow, what a hold on to your hats moment there. If you want to reach out to John, he's on LinkedIn. Where else do you hang out, John?
Well, I have a Facebook page, John David Mann. I have LinkedIn, as you say. My website, which is just my name, johndavidmann.com, is where I'm going to be releasing tidbits and sneak previews of the book. And that's where the book about writing, how to write good, is going to be on the website. So everything I got, it's there on the site.
Fantastic. Well, look, now we've got your number and your name. You can't get away from us now. So thank you once again. And
right. You know where I live.
Yeah, exactly. So look, thank you everyone for watching. Great show. Thank you once again, John. And stay tuned, guys, for the next installment. And go forward and release your Genie today. Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Well, that's a wrap. You have been listening to yet another episode of the Release the Genie podcast with host Paul Rogers. Be sure to follow Paul on the LinkedIn platform and learn more of Paul's resources at www.takeactionacademy.ca. And until next time, as always, be mindful and be sure to release your Genie. Thanks for listening.